The Where Our Minds Wander podcast may contain sensitive content and explicit language. Listener discretion is advised. Greetings, fellow wanderers, to the places our minds wander.
The house at the end of the dirt road, where disembodied voices whisper and strange sounds make the living shiver.
Where shadows lurk at the edge of the woods, just outside your back door. And mysterious lights speed beyond reason across the clear night sky.
Odd events throughout time that lead you down the rabbit hole.
I'm Wes.
And I'm Beth.
And this is Where Our Minds Wander. Hello and welcome to Where Our Minds Wander, all you fellow wanderers. Thank you for joining us.
Hello, everyone.
We have an excellent episode for all of you wanderers tonight, featuring two ships. In the first part of the episode, Beth's going to tell everyone about the USS Eldridge's involvement in the infamous Philadelphia experiment. And later on in the episode, I'm going to tell you all about the USS Salem, her history, and her haunted reputation. So sit back, get comfy, and let's get into tonight's episode.
Well, before we start the episode, I have to correct a mistake I made last week.
You made a mistake?
I did. It was at the end of the episode when we were talking about places we had been to in Texas.
Yes.
And I was talking about being in Amarillo and going to this famous steakhouse.
Yes,
and
I remember that.
For some reason, I called it the Mitchell Steakhouse. And as I was falling asleep that night, I pinged awake because I was like, it wasn't the Mitchell Steakhouse. It was the Big Texan, which is the most famous steakhouse in Amarillo. So what I had done was I had confused it with this other cool place that we went to on that trip, which was the Mitchell Corn Palace in Mitchell, South Dakota, which, by the way, is not a steakhouse at all.
It's a corn palace.
It's a palace made out of corn.
That's a little bit of a difference there.
I know. I don't know what I was thinking, but I wanted to correct that in case some of you who are listening were wondering what the heck I was talking about.
Well, I wouldn't worry about it, dear. Everyone makes mistakes.
Even me.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, even you.
Sometimes.
Well, as we said before, sit back, get comfy, and Beth's finally going to get into her story.
For real this time.
Yeah.
The USS Eldridge was a Cannon-class destroyer escort that left New York City on January 4th, 1944, to bring men and supplies to North Africa. Basically, she was designed for anti-submarine warfare. She made 9 successful voyages just that year. On May 28, 1945, she left New York City once again, only this time bound for the Pacific, where she escorted destroyers and patrolled the waters off Okinawa for the next year. In 1951, she was renamed the Leon and transferred to the Greek Navy under the Mutual Defense Assistance Act. She served for another 40 years, mostly patrolling the eastern Aegean Sea and being used for cadet training, until she was decommissioned and sold as scrap in 1999. She was a formidable ship, the USS Eldridge, and for all intents and purposes, she served well and suffered no major war-related tragedies. She didn't sink. She was never allegedly haunted. She's not a ghost ship. So, right now, you're all either wondering why I'm even talking about her, or you know the name USS Eldridge, and you know exactly why I'm talking about her.
I do.
Well, I should hope so.
I've seen the movie.
I've never seen the movie, and for a long part of my life, I thought that it starred Katharine Hepburn and Spencer Tracy. Because I was confusing the Philadelphia story with the Philadelphia experiment.
Yeah, I saw it many years ago, the Philadelphia Experiment movie. It was good back then, but we will have to go through and watch it, and I advise all of you out there who haven't seen it to do it.
I've never seen it.
It wasn't bad.
I've seen the X-Files episode about it.
Right.
So the USS Eldridge was the ship that allegedly dematerialized and rematerialized during the Philadelphia experiment.
Yeah, it's a lot like the transporter in Star Trek.
Yes.
Like, beam me up, Scotty.
Very much so. Now, for the last few decades, most people have already decided that the Philadelphia experiment was just a hoax, a story completely made up and perpetuated by two main players, Morris K. Jessup and Carl Allen. Morris K. Jessup, according to explorersweb.com, was well respected in all of the many fields he was involved in. In 1923, he was part of a three-man team that photographed areas of Brazil for the U.S. Department of Agriculture. He was hoping to support the U.S.'s plans to grow rubber in the Amazon. He had also been interested in astronomy since he was little, and he received his Bachelor of Science degree in astronomy from the University of Michigan in 1925. He obtained his master's degree in astronomy while working at the Lamont-Hussey Observatory. He also had some experience in archaeology, taking part in digs in both the Yucatan and Peru. He documented one expedition to Cuzco in 1930. Although his day job was working as a car parts salesman, Jessup was also a writer. He wrote his first book, The Case for UFOs, in 1955. He suggested in his book that alien visitation was connected to various prehistoric monuments all around the world. He was also interested in Helena Blavatsky's theories of theosophy and the existence of Atlantis, Lemuria, and Mu. Is it Mu or Mew, my dear?
Mew.
The cow said, what?
Mew. That's sad.
And I didn't even plan it. It just happened naturally.
Carry on.
So, Jessup was highly immersed in the historical, astronomical, and paranormal realms. And as I said, he was highly respected, especially in the world of ufology. More than a decade later, Eric von Daniken made similar claims in his book, Chariots of the Gods, about aliens and prehistoric monuments. Ancient Aliens is pretty much based on Jessup's theories, now that I think about it. But in 1956, Jessup was considered a leader in UFO studies. And one day in January of that year, he began receiving some rather odd letters. It wasn't your typical fan mail. According to explorersweb.com, 50 letters filled with randomly capitalized words, underlined text, and weird groupings of letters and numbers arrived. The writer, a man named Carl Allen, sometimes referred to himself as Carlos Miguel Allende. The letters often criticized Jessup for his naive understanding of unified field theory, a theory Einstein had failed to solve. Allen claimed that not only had Einstein taught him about the theory himself, but that Allen had seen proof that teleportation actually worked. Allen claimed that he was a former merchant marine stationed aboard the SS Andrew Furuseth in 1943. During October, as they were docked in the Philadelphia Naval Shipyard, he and other sailors allegedly witnessed a really strange green glow enveloping another ship, the USS Eldridge. The green fog swirled around the Eldridge for a few minutes, and when it finally dissipated, the Eldridge was gone. Well, sort of. Allen claimed that they could see something floating on the surface of the water, but it was not a solid ship. After a few moments, the USS Eldridge reappeared before their eyes, exactly where it had been before. Allen claimed that the USS Eldridge had been part of a U.S. government project called Project Rainbow. Around October 28th of 1943, the Eldridge had been teleported by the U.S. government from Philadelphia to Norfolk, Virginia, 480 kilometers away, using Einstein's unsolved unified field theory. In other words, somebody had solved unified field theory, and the U.S. government had used it to teleport the 1,240-ton, 306-foot-long USS Eldridge in plain sight of hundreds of enlisted men. But, Allen said, it was not entirely successful. Allen wrote in his letters that when the Eldridge reappeared, he heard terrible screams. He left the Andrew Furuseth and ran towards the Eldridge, boarding her as quickly as he could to offer assistance. And what he saw was horrifying. Not only were some crew members babbling incoherently with terrible burn marks, many were dead and appeared as if they had been turned inside out. Possibly even more disturbing, some were still alive, but their limbs had been fused with the ship itself. Or they had fallen through the floors and were embedded within them. Now, obviously, Morris Jessup wanted to know more, and he reached out to Carl Allen, but he received no further communication. He also couldn't find a single other witness. But according to HowStuffWorks.com, Jessup was intrigued enough to keep searching, at least for a little while. But when Allen went silent, Jessup grew frustrated. He didn't know that Allen had also contacted the Navy's Office of Naval Research and sent them a package. The package, labeled Happy Easter, contained Jessup's book, which Allen had filled with side notes, annotations, and numbers. He also included pages of his own scribbled physics equations and calculations. Weirdly, he'd used 3 different handwriting styles, claiming one was written by an alien. When the ONR contacted Jessup, he confirmed that all 3 handwriting styles were Allen's, and he agreed to help them figure out exactly what Allen's deal was. Did he really see something, or was he making it all up? When they went to the address on Allen's letters, all they found was a long-abandoned house. Jessup's follow-up books were nowhere near as successful as his first, and his friends said that he showed signs of depression, especially after his marriage ended. He was also in a terrible car accident that he never fully recovered from psychologically. He was found in his car on April 29, 1959, having taken his own life. Although his death was considered suspicious by people who believed in the authenticity of the Philadelphia experiment, they wondered if Jessup had gotten too close to the truth. The ONR came to their own conclusion. They stated that the Eldridge wasn't in Philadelphia during the time Carl Allen claimed it disappeared and reappeared. They also reported that Lieutenant Junior Grade William S. Dodge of the Andrew Furuseth claimed that no one on board his ship saw anything unusual that day. As for Carl Allen, well, the search for his identity was picked up by writer Robert A. Gorman, a staff writer for Fate magazine. He was able to track Allen's location from Pennsylvania to New Mexico, where he interviewed some of Allen's relatives. According to explorersweb.com, they described him as a, quote, master leg puller with a theatrical flair. They also called him a drifter who read constantly but somehow got the information all twisted. He was, however, in the Marines for about a year during World War II. The sequence of numbers throughout his letters to Jessup turned out to be his military ID number. Eventually, Carl Allen did come forward, and he retold his story with incredible conviction to interviewers and authors, including Ivan Sanderson and Brad Steiger. But then he'd turn around and retract everything. Then he'd go on and tell even more people his story, and then retract it all again. He told the Aerial Phenomena Research Office in Tucson, Arizona, that it was a total hoax. But Allen was still the only witness, 30 years after it allegedly happened. And then in 1984, the Philadelphia Experiment movie came out. Not the Philadelphia Story, starring Katharine Hepburn. And a man named Al Bielek came forward. According to HowStuffWorks.com, Bielek claimed that he was part of Project Rainbow and had been brainwashed to forget that it had ever happened. Bielek became a talk show and radio show mainstay, and he still is to some degree. He claims that after his experience on the Eldridge, he was approached by actor Mark Hamill, who was Luke Skywalker of Star Wars, in case you didn't know, and recruited for the Montauk Project. A decade later, French astrophysicist and ufologist Jacques Vallée published his groundbreaking article, Anatomy of a Hoax, the Philadelphia Experiment 50 Years Later, in the Journal of Scientific Exploration. Now, if Vallée's name sounds familiar, it probably should, because he is still frequently interviewed on radio shows and podcasts, and he is one of the leading experts in ufology. He was also the inspiration for the scientist in Steven Spielberg's movie Close Encounters of the Third Kind. But anyway, Vallée asked readers in his article to contact him if they knew anything about the Philadelphia experiment. And former naval officer Edward Dungeon responded. Dungeon was stationed on the USS Engstrom from 1942 to 1945. Dungeon said everyone knew full well that there were classified devices on board the Engstrom and the Eldridge. The ships were both dry docked at the Philadelphia Naval Yard during October of 1943. However, the classified devices were not for teleportation. Far from it. They actually enabled degaussing. I think I'm saying it right.
Degaussing.
Degaussing. Thank you, dear. It was a fairly new technology at the time, where ships were wrapped in electrified cables that messed with the U-boat's ability to torpedo them. It did not make the ships invisible to radar, but it did mess with the magnetic torpedoes that U-boats deployed. According to an article on northshoreheritage.org, Dungeon claimed that a bunch of sailors from both ships were in a Philadelphia tavern one night when a fight broke out. Some of the soldiers had apparently said too much and too loudly about their ship's ability to be, quote, invisible. The other sailors told them to be quiet. Dungeon, who was underage at the time, was ushered out the back door by a waitress before the first punches were thrown. The Eldridge set sail at 11 p.m. that night, using canals not accessible to the general public, which meant they arrived in Norfolk just 6 hours later to stock up on ammunition. The Angstrom followed later, actually passing the Eldridge on its way back to Philly. They were both back in Philly by the following day. He also mentions being caught in St. Elmo's fire off the coast of Bermuda and being very aware of what the green glow can look like. So, this is really interesting because Dungeon's account definitely seems credible, and he gives the general public some information that they might not have known, like the existence of various canals that were exclusively used by the military to shorten their sailing time between ports, and that fact that both ships had classified devices on board. But he puts the Angstrom and the Eldridge in the Philadelphia harbor at the exact time that Allen claims the Eldridge teleported, something the U.S. Navy completely denies. According to the Naval History and Heritage Command website, records in the Archives branch have repeatedly been searched, but no one has found any documentation referencing any confirmation of the event or any naval interest in even attempting any such experiment. The USS Eldridge deck log shows the Eldridge being mostly docked in New York City from August of 1943 until December of 1943. Now, it did sail to Bermuda during that time, but it always returned directly to New York, with just one exception. Specifically, it was docked in New York from October 18th until November 1st, which means it couldn't have been docked with the Angstrom in Philly. The ship's log does show that it was docked in Norfolk on November 2nd until November 3rd. So the timing doesn't line up.
Not at all.
Now, even more interesting, the Naval History and Heritage Command website also documents the Andrew-Furuseth's whereabouts during those months, and that's the ship that Carl Allen claimed he had been on. And it turns out it was nowhere near Philadelphia in October of 1943. It was off the coast of Cape Henry on October 4th and left Norfolk on October 25th for the city of Oran in Algeria, where it arrived November 12th. The article continues that although Albert Einstein was briefly a part-time consultant with the Navy's Bureau of Ordnance, he was there to consult on matters of explosives. He was not involved in the Manhattan Project, the making of the atom bomb, and he certainly wasn't involved in teleportation experiments. In addition, this article at the Naval History and Heritage Command website addresses Project Rainbow. They say that in the 1940s, the word rainbow was code for the Rome-Berlin-Tokyo axis, and the project was to defeat Italy, Germany, and Japan. Rainbow 5 was the code word for the plan to fight the Axis powers after the bombing of Pearl Harbor. But nowhere in the Rainbow documents is there any reference to any sort of teleportation experiments. And finally, the article explains the exact nature of degaussing, and that they believe some people have misinterpreted it to mean invisibility. In essence, it only cancels out a ship's magnetic field and makes it undetectable to magnetic mines, but it does not make that ship invisible to the naked eye, radar systems, or underwater listening devices. So that's the official military word on the subject, at least as far as what's readily accessible by the web surfing public. In 1999, a writer for the Philadelphia Inquirer attended a reunion of the USS Eldridge sailors in Atlantic City. In the article, the sailors confirmed that the Eldridge never docked in Philadelphia. So, why has the Philadelphia experiment conspiracy theory persisted for all of these years? There's a bunch of reasons, I guess. Believers say that ship logs can be easily falsified. And since the USS Eldridge was a failure, they chose to cover it up. If it had succeeded, we'd definitely all know about it because it would have changed the entire way militaries around the world fought wars. Supporters say that men like Carl Allen and Al Bielek are the truth tellers and have been made to sound like liars and kooks because the government still doesn't want the truth to be known. But most of all, I think it's because the image of soldiers being reassembled during a teleportation experiment where their limbs are fused to parts of a ship and their bodies are turned inside out speaks to the lengths that countries are willing to go to during wartime to create the, quote, best weapon. The Philadelphia experiment seems like something that could have happened, especially when seen in the context of what humans were really doing to each other during World War II. It doesn't seem all that far-fetched when you look at it that way.
Yeah, I really liked the Philadelphia experiment and all the different theories out there. I thoroughly enjoyed the movie back then. And it was just something to make your mind wander. But it does seem very far-fetched.
With what we can do with technology now, it does seem like a far-fetched idea that was something that they had almost mastered in 1943.
Right.
But in 1943, I probably would have believed it.
Well, think about it. It'd be an easy way to move military equipment from one spot to the next. So you could have tanks in one country, and then all of a sudden, you don't have to worry about putting them on ships or planes or anything like that. They just materialize in another country.
Right.
Yeah. And the cool thing about the movie was, I mean, you look at it and you start thinking about it. It's like, wow. You know, even if you haven't seen it, just telling everybody about it, you kind of get the visualization about it, about bodies being stuck in different parts of the ship, in and out. And it's creepy as all hell.
Yeah, it's horrifying.
Well, something to think about. Sit back and enjoy the break. And when we return, I'm going to tell you all about the USS Salem, its history, and some of its ghosts.
Hey, did you know? The Paris catacombs may hold the skeletal remains of more than 6 million people, and the basement of St. Leonard's Church in the UK might hold 4,000. But a new discovery at St. Bavo's Cathedral in Ghent, Belgium, can be added to the list. During a recent construction project, 9 walls made entirely of over 1,000 adult human thigh and shin bones, as well as broken skulls, were uncovered. Believed to be constructed in the 17th or 18th centuries, the wall's bones are from the 15th century. Since it was against the law to discard skeletal remains, it seems likely that it was a 17th century way of repurposing the skeletons that were exhumed in order to make room for more burials. Who'da thunk it?
All right, we're back. And unlike the USS Eldridge, which was not a haunted ship, the heavy cruiser at Permanent Dock in Quincy, Massachusetts, most certainly is. The USS Salem is said to be the most haunted ship in the entire United States. And I thought that it would be a perfect topic for the second half of tonight's episode. Today, the USS Salem is an incredible floating museum. Several of the rooms have museum display cases containing weapons and other artifacts. But for the most part, the ship is a time capsule. It's been kept exactly as it looked while it was an active warship. There's a fully preserved dentist's office that still contains all the dental instruments and sets of false teeth. And there's also an operating room, which looks exactly as it did while the ship was still in service. Since it's the only surviving World War II-era heavy cruiser left in the world, thousands of people visit the USS Salem every year, including school children. And whether they know of the ship's haunted reputation or not, several come away feeling as though they've experienced something that they just couldn't explain. Some families might be even lucky enough to go on a fantastic tour with an older volunteer named John, who shows them the parts of the ship not generally open to the public. John, who comes across as a seasoned sailor in his somewhat old-fashioned style uniform, is friendly and knowledgeable. He seems to know the ship as if though he spent many years on board. He might even warn the youngest member of the family on the tour to not go in certain areas because they're dangerous. But just as the tour has ended and the family rejoins the dozens of other visitors in one of the main rooms of the ship, they lose sight of John before they can thank him. It's only when they approach another museum employee to ask him to pass on their gratitude that they realize something was really off about it all. John does not fit the description of anyone working there. Like I said before, the USS Salem, also known as the Sea Witch, is haunted. The 17,000-ton Des Moines heavy-class cruiser was built in Quincy, Massachusetts in 1945 and first set sail in March of 1947. She was commissioned in 1949 under the command of Captain John C. Daniel. She was special because she was the first ever ship to carry automatic 8-inch guns that also used cased ammunition. The USS Salem stopped in Salem, Massachusetts on the 4th of July in 1949 before sailing to Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, where she stayed off and on until December. Over the next few years, she split her time between Guantanamo Bay and the Mediterranean as the flagship for the 6th Fleet. She was part of several training exercises and visited ports in Malta, Italy, France, Greece, Turkey, Lebanon, and Algeria. In 1953, the Salem was the first American ship to arrive in Greece after the devastating Ionian earthquakes. In August of that year, 113 separate earthquakes shook the Greek islands of Kefalonia and Zakynthos, with the largest measuring 7.2. The island of Kefalonia actually rose 24 inches higher above sea level as a result.
But that's a big deal. That's why I was making the face, because it's like, oh shit. 2 feet.
As you can imagine, the quake caused major destruction and devastation, leveling both capital cities on both islands. only 2 buildings in Zakynthos' capital remained standing. But it also caused the deaths of between 445 and 800 people. 4 days after the quake, the USS Salem was one of the medic rescue ships, taking on countless wounded. Hundreds of earthquake victims were treated on board, and although no records exist of the number of the fatalities on board as a result of the quake, it's widely accepted that many occurred. When supplies were running so low that even the crew was in jeopardy of running out of food, they had no choice but to leave. In 1956 and 1957, during her 7th deployment, the Salem helped maintain stability in the Suez Canal and off the coast of Jordan. On her return voyage to Boston in 1958, she was redirected to Lebanon. Although the Salem never saw combat, she was most often a medic ship, offering the best surgical care to both wounded sailors and civilians. In January of 1959, the USS Salem was decommissioned and put into the reserve fleet in Philadelphia, where she sat unused for 3 decades. In October of 1994, she was brought to her permanent home in Quincy, where she was turned into the museum that you can visit today. It's easy to get lost in the past as you walk through the museum displays, and even easier to imagine life on the ship as you step into those rooms that are preserved to look exactly as they did while the ship was in service. I can see how people can imagine sailors moving around them, tending to their duties, eating in the mess hall, and relaxing in their bunks. But when you are alone in a room and you hear footsteps coming up behind you, or if the museum is closed for the night and you hear a voice calling your name, well, sometimes you have to accept that it's just not your imagination. That just happened to be the case for John Connor, the ship's head archivist. In the Patriot Ledger's 2019 article, Ghost Ship, History and Mystery of the USS Salem by Sean Robinson, Connor describes one experience that he had that he just couldn't explain. The sleeping quarters have very low ceilings and bunk beds stacked 3 high along the walls. As he walked around one of the sleeping quarters one Saturday, he heard someone outside the room calling his name. So he called back, but got no response. As far as he knew, he was the only one on board, but he exited the room and looked around anyway. Of course, he didn't find anyone. At other times, he's heard someone walking around in nearby rooms, but yet again, when he goes to look, he's completely alone. In the same article, a longtime museum employee named Peter Bloomberg said he's had only one experience that he absolutely could not explain in the 21 years that he's worked there. It was March, and as he walked down a hallway near the back of the ship, he was startled by a large figure of a man suddenly standing a few dozen feet in front of him. The two of them made eye contact, and this figure looked at him as if to say, quote, "What do you want? Don't bother me," before it suddenly turned around and walked down the staircase, except his feet made no sound as he descended the stairs. So that's pretty creepy.
Yeah, it is when you're there by yourself and you come face to face with somebody when you don't expect there to be anyone there.
Now, I also found a Reddit post from 2012 by user Jay Coons, who wrote that they were working on the Salem as a security guard during a nighttime ghost tour. It was part of their job to make sure all of the guests had left the ship at the end of the tour. The ship has 2 main hallways that run the length of the ship with several connecting hallways that are each about 7 feet long. As they made the rounds, they decided to see if they could see a ghost for themselves. So they yelled as they walked down one of the main hallways. As they passed one of the last connecting hallways, there was a scary-looking man framed in the doorway. He was in the opposite main hallway, standing perfectly still. In their posts, J. Kunz described the man as middle-aged, tall, lanky, and dressed in some sort of dark green or gray jumpsuit. His face was, quote, sunken, and he looked pissed, as if the employee was interrupting something on his ship. The employee darted the short distance down the connecting hallway, but there was nobody there on the other side. The only place this figure could go was around a corner, so the employee headed that way, but the scary-looking man was gone. He may have been the spirit nicknamed the Angry Sentinel, an entity that is known for being aggressive if you disrespect the ship. Since the Reddit poster was yelling at the time, and in his own words, trying to provoke a ghost into showing itself, the Angry Sentinel may have felt the need to make himself known.
That's what happens when you provoke a ghost.
That's right, you don't provoke them. According to the nightlyspirits.com article, An Eerie Setting in Boston, some visitors have recorded what sounds like a woman screaming from inside the operating room. They've also captured EVPs of a woman pleading with someone to, quote, get it out.
That's creepier to me than seeing a man standing in the hallway.
That's rather disturbing.
Yeah.
Get it out?
Yeah.
What's she talking about?
I would assume a child during childbirth, but who knows? It could have been shrapnel from the earthquake or, could have been anything.
I know.
Ugh.
Well, it makes you wonder.
I know.
The most frequent encounters tend to involve whispering voices, the sound of hatches slamming, and the sound of footsteps walking up on people, to the point that they actually step aside, thinking someone is trying to rush past them. Many of these paranormal encounters sound like residual haunts, the ghost of sailors who are still trying to do their jobs, or civilian patients who may have died on board. With the exception of John, the Phantom tour guide, no one has reported interacting with these spirits in a way that suggests an intelligent haunt. But that might not be the case in the two rooms considered the hot spots of the ship, the former mess hall and the kitchen. Rumor has it that the spirit of a former cook haunts the kitchen, and that he likes for the area to be kept exactly the way he wants it. When people have tried to rearrange items in the kitchen, they often return to find them put back exactly the way they were before. There have also been reports of someone or something banging on the freezer in the pantry, but this activity isn't attributed to the tidy cook. Reports say that this mischievous banging sound is caused by a group of teenage female entities known collectively as the Living Doll Girls. One of the founding members of the Greater Boston Paranormal Associates, a man named Don DiCristofaro, said in the Patriot Ledger article that it's very rare for a group to visit the ship for a ghost tour and not end up experiencing something. He talks about one specific night when his group walked into the mess hall, and before any of them could even react, one of the chairs pulled away from a table by itself as though it was being dragged. Then, another chair at the end of the table actually fell over onto its side. At the time, a loud whirring noise filled the air, which turned out to be the old dentist's drill in the dentist's office, just one room away. How or why the drill turned on by itself was a total mystery. The mess hall is also where a young girl with a facial wound has been seen. Some reports describe her as missing half of her face. This spirit of a young girl only speaks Greek and is thought to be one of the victims of the Ionian earthquakes.
Can I just hop in for a second? I feel bad if there's a young girl who died from a horrible wound during the earthquakes in Greece, which was her home, and now she's stuck on a warship in Massachusetts.
Yeah, she's a ways from home.
That's just sad to me.
But by far, the strangest report of the mess hall are the growling hellhounds. Unfortunately, this is one of those cases where every website mentions a pack of menacing dog-like creatures prowling the mess hall and other parts of the ship. But not one of those sites give any details.
Really?
Yeah.
Ugh, I hate that.
The hellhounds, by the way, aren't to be confused with the scratchers. One or more entities who are known to scratch people's legs while they are touring the ship. But the most talked about entity, by far, is the one known as the Burning Man. Many of the earthquake victims were brought to the Salem with horrible fourth-degree burns caused by broken gas lines that exploded after the quake. It's quite common for visitors to the ship to ask about the strange scent of burning ash that they say they can smell. BostonGhost.com says that the Burning Man often hides in the berthing area below the mess hall, where several of the earthquake's victims' bodies were kept after the morgue was full. But another popular theory is that the Burning Man was brought on board after an explosion on another ship, the USS Cleveland. This version took me quite a while to research, and as far as I can tell, it's highly unlikely. There were 4 ships named the USS Cleveland. The one that suffered an explosion was the LPD-7, or an amphibious transport dock. The explosion, which happened in 1975, while the Cleveland was docked at the Brooklyn Navy Yard, was caused by an electrical fire in the mess hall. Now, the references to this explosion say that the injured sailors from the Cleveland were brought on board the Salem for medical treatment. There seems to be 3 problems with this story. First, as far as I can tell, the Brooklyn Navy Yard was decommissioned and sold to the city in 1966. And second, I couldn't find any evidence that the Salem and the Cleveland were ever docked near each other at any time in their history, especially since that particular USS Cleveland wasn't in service until 12 years after the Salem was decommissioned and sitting in the reserve fleet in Philadelphia.
Well, that makes it a little difficult for those to be next to each other then.
That it does.
And speaking of that, I'm going to jump in for just a second, if that's okay. Out of curiosity, I also tried to figure out if the USS Eldridge, which by the time of the Ionian earthquakes was part of the Greek fleet. Remember, it was renamed the Leon. And so I was wondering if the USS Salem, which was in Greece at the same time during the earthquakes, if they were ever docked near each other. But because it was sold to Greece, trying to find anything on the Leon was near impossible. So I couldn't find anything putting them near each other.
Yeah, it's pretty hard sometimes going back and trying to make any connections.
Especially when the ships, that, like you said, 4 ships with the same name.
Right. Okay, so back to the Burning Man. It seems more likely that he was a victim of the 1963 earthquake and that he passed away on board. People who have encountered the apparition of the Burning Man say that he reeks of burning flesh or that he, quote, smells like death. Overall, most visitors to the USS Salem report strange experiences that are more auditory rather than visual. Like I said before, the sound of someone walking up behind them is quite common, as well as hearing whispers and, in some cases, even hearing screams or orders being called out and acknowledged. It's true that visitors also report seeing shadow people and full apparitions, even sometimes scoring a private tour with John the Phantom tour guide. As a medic ship, The USS Salem helped not just wounded sailors, but sick and injured civilians. It was in essence a floating hospital, and one that served thousands of people over its 10-year service. It's now a unique, one-of-a-kind museum where visitors can get a real sense of what life on a military ship was like. For most visitors, the history of the ship is enough, and well worth a visit. But if you're into the paranormal, the USS Salem has even more to offer.
I remember touring a big-ass ship when I was a kid. And my parents, we traveled a lot. We went all over.
Yeah, all over the world. You've lived all over the world. You've been everywhere.
Well, I wasn't going to say that.
You've had such a great childhood.
I did. I wasn't trying to toot my own horn. But what I was going to say is I do remember going on several huge ships. And I remember touring a submarine because my dad was into boats, especially military boats.
Right.
But I also remember touring a ship that sounds like it was the Salem. But I have no idea what ship it might have been. I'd have to ask my father.
You would have been too little to appreciate it back then anyway.
Oh, I appreciated it. It was freaking cool.
Well, perhaps you were on the USS Salem at one time.
Whatever ship it was, museum ship, it was so cool. I remember just thinking it was the coolest thing ever.
But you didn't get a tour from a creepy ghost, did you?
No.
He's not creepy, really. I find him fascinating.
No, and if I had, it would have been a completely different story, and I'd be afraid to get on ships for the rest of my life. Because I was a wuss when I was a kid.
You're not now.
No.
Boy, I've trained you well. See, it is possible out there, you gentlemen.
I was going to say, you've scared me so much that I'm over it.
I know. We did put you through the test.
You did.
With scary movies and everything else.
I know.
But it's been worth it.
Yes.
I mean, you've been places that you never knew you were near.
I know.
Look how many places that you could have stopped at.
I know. I was so close to, I was in the Uinta Basin and didn't realize that, I knew where I was, but I didn't realize, and I don't know, there's some other places too where I was like, holy crap, I was there and had no idea I was within the supernatural paranormal realm. And I was just living my own, non-paranormal existence.
Right. Well, you'll be retired in another 8 years. And if I'm still alive, we're going to hit all these places.
It sounds so far away when you say it like that.
It is, believe me. Well, there you have it, everyone. The USS Salem and the USS Eldridge.
Yes, and if you would like to know more, of course, you can always check our sources in our show notes.
That you can. And with that said, thank you once again for joining us, and we'll see you all next week, hopefully, for another episode of Where Our Minds Wander.
See you soon. Thank you for joining us. We look forward to traveling with you again to the places where our minds wander.
If you like what you heard, please take a moment and provide us with a 5-star rating and a comment on your favorite listening platform. It really helps us move up the list and become more visible on the podcast charts so new people can find us.
And thank you all for your continued support.
See you next week for an all-new episode.